Yeah. Very formal. I know this is neighborhood, there's some of these languages around. Okay. Good morning. So it's Monday. So we need a round of presentations. We start with one of the organizers. Yes.
Fernando Carrasco from Northwestern University. I've been interested for a long time in collider phenomenology and then computation of scattering amplitude, scattering amplitudes. And recently also got interested in some applications too.
I'm Oliver from Max Planck in Potsdam. I'm a classical person, so I try and do scattering in self-force NR and GFE.
I'm Dennis from the University of Southampton. I'm also a classical person. I'm interested in how scattering can be used to inform panel quantum problem.
Hi, I'm Carrasco from the University of Edinburgh. I work on scattering amplitude from the application of gravitational physics. I'm interested in relation between the scattering and the Hawking model, and also work on some applications.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm based in India, and I'm a gravitational physicist, so I work mostly on testing models of gravitationalism and data. So I'm interested in seeing how scattering or effects of models can be tested.
So Andrew is the only data analyst present this week. I only want him to roll it. So he's yes. Ricardo? Okay, we're going to the other presentations. You want to? Yes.
People want to participate in the presentation.
No, we it's Monday morning. It's Monday morning, so we give a 30-second presentation of each person. Yes, please.
Okay, my name is Ricardo Medina. I'm from Federal University in Portugal. It's about 5 hours from here. I've been working with string scattering amplitudes at simple level, things like this. But I'm very, very interested in getting in the field of gravitational waves. That's why.
Well, yes.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Reyes. I am from Mexico. I am interested in scattering amplitudes. In Mexico, we are studying some special gravity aspects using these formulae. And also, we are using the massive scattering formulae for studying some decays with second plane modulation using effective theories. And also, we are now interested in learn more about gravitational waves. Yeah, that's thank you very much.
I am Stefano Boffa from Geneva. I come from GIA. We work on two models using the effective theory approach. And so I'm very interested in what's in practice.
Hello everyone, Fabio Bautista. I am a postdoc in the issues in scaling amplitudes for the dual problem. But I'm interested in higher speed amplitudes and significant confidence function.
Yeah, so I'm David Kosnauer. I'm usually a psychologist here on at CERN, and mostly work in amplitudes, earlier as part of PCD, and now as part of gravitational waves.
Okay, yeah. Hello. I'm as well as Fabian. And then, so I'm a postdoc. I work on broad aspects of scattering amplitudes. So I work mostly on QCD,
but also some works on more than 50, something I'm going to talk about Wednesday. And yeah, overall, some growth aspects of static analysis.
I'm Ricardo Soraglia, I'm local, and I'm member of LIGO since many years, 15, 14 years now. And I work on the modeling development instead on with these years in the benefit union methods. And that's why I'm very open to learn about these amplitudes, what we can use for amplitude methods. And today the first topic is by JJ. Maybe you can introduce yourself and then just jump.
Fantastic. You know, I'm gonna see if we can play with the lighting just a little bit because I made the brilliant choice. So
And just try.
Nope. Okay. Yeah, better maybe?
No, è che investigare la luz, no? Che investigare la luz si può.
Oh.
No, the one in the back is okay, right?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, so I'm better with gluons and photons. Clearly. My name is Joseph Carrasco. I'm at Northwestern University, and most of what I've done is scattering amplitudes and some of it fairly formal UV properties of maximally supersymmetric supergravity theories and finding ways of relating predictions in gauge theory as to predictions. Gravity theories, most of my phenomenology has been actually in cosmology calculations in effective field theory of large scale structure. But I've been deeply interested in this program of applying amplitudes methods or amplitudes insights into trying to help trying to help with this program of understanding classical gravity better. I think well, why don't I just talk about what I'm going to talk about? We'll see where it goes from there. But I'm deeply interested in talking with any of you who wants to talk with me. I'd greatly be interested in learning how the types of things I do could possibly help you. And I definitely like to learn about how the challenges you face can help me understand some of the things that I'm trying to understand better.
And so, which day are you leaving?
I'm leaving Friday, so I'm here for the rest of the program. Okay. Cool. So this is just pictures of all the people who do all of our work. These are grad students and postdocs and collaborators of mine. And I'll refer them by name in the future, but I'd like to point out one person, Alex Edison, my group, particularly. Well, so Ingrid and Alex have both worked in classical gravitational wave related problems. Ingrid's looked at radiation in 1 5-point direction. And Alex has been doing some really interesting work with tail effects in collaboration with Michelle Levy with one paper that came out last year applying unitarity methods sort of at the core of what we're doing to making higher loop calculations easier. And with something that should be pushing the state of the art that's coming out relatively soon. So I'd recommend definitely paying attention to Alex. Pay attention to all of them, of course. So this is going to be a double copy talk. I know this isn't actually can I get a show of hands? Who's familiar with the concept of sort of flat space amplitudes colored dual double copy?
Okay.
Familiar. Okay. So a lot of you. Can I see a show of hands of people who've actually calculated something in gravity by calculating something in gauge theory? Okay, so it's less people. So good. All right. So I'll post my slides and I'll have links to these reviews. I think probably the most accessible review for people who are outside of amplitudes entirely will oddly enough be this NOMAPS white paper, double copying its applications. I think it's very readable and it gives a good sense of the very broad program for what people are trying to achieve, as well as some very modern references. There's something that's an introduction for technical amplitudes people, sort of the aimed towards students, which is this SAGEX review, and then we've got slightly older, 4 or 5 years old, but a very thick technical review that you might find interesting as well. Okay, so what's one of the advantages of planning sort of color dual double copy in is what we realize is that we can build the predictions of many theories of interest, including, and I've hidden the thing of interest for you guys, this Einstein-Hilbert gravity, right? So including Einstein-Hilbert gravity, we can build predictions for physical intervals in these theories by considering predictions with a very small number of building blocks, and then just combining them in different ways to get predictions for a wide web of theories. And I think one thing that's been pretty clear and is definitely after my own heart from interacting with people over this past week at this workshop is we're in a room with people who definitely have predictions they want to extract and are looking to try to get them as efficiently as possible, because it's really pushing the edge of what they can do, either computationally or in terms of current ideas. And the idea, hopefully, is by so one thing that I'll hope to emphasize in this talk is one of the reasons why I find this approach so attractive is not only does it make calculating in gravity easier, but if you can pull it off, it makes calculating in your gauge theories easier. You have to consider a much smaller amount of information and then relations propagate this to full solutions. I'll talk about how that works as we go forward. So just to reiterate, double copy invites us to construct and combine our favorite theories using building blocks. Right, and these are fundamental bits. So you can talk about Yang-Mills as color and vector, or super Yang-Mills as color and vector, supersymmetric particles. We can talk about the nonlinear sigma models, pions and our chiral Lagrangian as color plus these higher derivative effective scalars. Supersymmetric Dirac, Ornienfeld, Vogel-Markulov are these very same chiral Lagrangian sort of pions, but double copied with the same vectors that would have made Yang-Mills if you double copied with pions. Instead of with color factors, you get Ornienfeld and friends. And of course, you get Einstein-Hilbert gravity by taking vectors with vectors or supergravities with vectors plus vectors. And throughout this talk, I'm going to be using this sort of outer product, or this times with the circle around it, just right, as a shorthand for double copy. And the process of taking predictions from these various building blocks and combining them is very, very precise. And at tree level, there are 3 equivalent formulations I know about: KLT, color kinematics, and CHY. And so what I'm going to be talking about today, and what's going to be guiding me, is sort of the color dual graph by graph approach that has led us.
How seriously should we be taking those inputs?
You should take in terms of what they do at tree level. You should take them absolutely.
Since that one representation is proven to imply.
Yeah. So and back and forth. And so you can go from any one of them to any of the others at tree level, and people have. So it's straightforward to derive field theory. Oh, so when I say KLT here, I mean field theory KLT. I mean the KLT that you guys wrote down, right? Field theory KLT. I'll also talk about how you can get string KLT out of this, out of a field theory perspective. What I mean here is so you can derive the KLT relation by starting with color kinematics, inverting the matrix or ordered amplitudes invert the matrix in terms of the kinematic numerators in terms of ordered amplitudes, and then the double copy gives you tree level relations in an ordered basis like KLT, and similarly back and forth with CHY. And some of the most elegant proofs of either of these actually have occurred in CHY because it's really good at going to all multiplicity at tree level. But as I said, I'm going to be talking about color kinematics, which is a graph by graph construction, and one that's particularly well suited to going after loop level stuff. I'm putting on this. So this is a slide. This is a slide that any of you who've seen my older talks may be very familiar with. It's I usually just mean these things very schematically. So I'll use this picture on the left just to emphasize that, you know, pions, you know, after you integrate out your gluons, you've got these scalars mediating the strong nuclear force, right? That pions can be described in terms of color dual stuff. This guy on the upper right over here, this is a stand-in for talking about a particularly powerful class of alpha attractors that fit all the cosmological alpha attractor models of inflation, that fit all the data constraints of observation right now. And it turns out at the heart of these alpha attractor models of inflation are nilpotent superfields, which you might think would be incredibly exotic and hard to talk about in any sort of double copy way, but it's one of the first things that we understood beyond gluon and gravitons. This is just Volkov-Akulov fermions. And so anyway, and so, you know, of course, QCD with massive fermions in the fundamentals we describe in a color dual way, and both open and closed string theories, we can understand at tree level from a field theory double copy perspective in terms of, and pulling all the stringy corrections into an effective theory, a much simpler effective field theory that's just sitting with a scalar. So all the tricky stuff is actually pulled onto much easier to play with scalars, double copy with
And maybe we can discuss that, but I'm curious to know more about the cosmological level.
That's what this talk's about.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. So last week there was just a fantastic and fascinating discussion. I hope we're gonna have another discussion this week. And one of the questions that Justin and you put on the board that we didn't get around to talking about is what do we learn about gravity? You know, given that as a double copy structure, what can we learn about gravity? And this is a great question. I think one thing that's actually made very clear in the cosmological context is that in gravitational quantum field theories, there are all sorts of questions that are hard to even pose sharply, and that we still don't actually know how we should be asking questions, right? But if we have the ability to understand questions, if we have the right to understand questions in quantum gravitational theories by asking questions about gauge theories on flat space-time, which we have every right to be able to talk about as far as we understand, then maybe there's something to pull on. So I am absolutely certain that I'm going to be learning more about this relationship between theories as I explore more questions in inflation, and I hope that by grappling with this, we're going to be able to clarify some puzzles with quantum gravity in curved backgrounds. But that's very aspirational. But that's in a sense where one of my programs is going, and what I'll be talking about today. Okay. And so specifically, I will be talking about the building blocks of the alpha attractor supergravity models of inflation, and there are all sorts of references. And in fact, here this line running down the center in the upper right is just one parameter in these models. It's attracted, and you just all the solutions are attracted to that. Now, the reason I didn't put some big slide full of data right here, make that picture bigger and have that at the center of this slide, is because I think it would be misleading for where this talk is going. I'm not in this talk going to be talking about building alpha attractor models. There are plenty of alpha attractor models around, and Andre and Renan and I wrote some of them about 7 years ago. What I will be talking about is how we can start interacting with the building blocks of these models from a double copy perspective, from an amplitudes perspective. So it's a first step in the program. In fact, well, I'll talk more about where this fits in at the end. All I want you, so if you're not familiar with these models of inflation, all you have to know is that they are so far unconstrained by data, particularly they're kind of magical. They're very simple. So this is my first exposure to model building. Was working with Andre and Renata, and it was spectacular and fun and relaxing because almost anything you wrote down would work, and it would work almost magically, and it would work magically because there are these nilpotent superfields in the descriptions of the models that you can construct your scaffolding with. And then, of course, they square away and they go away, and then you're left and you can write your name in the sky, right? So the magic of these models relies on having these fields there. And that's all you need to know for this talk. The rest will sort of be self-contained. Okay. Now what's this talk going to be going for? Is it's going to be model building in the context of double copy, in the sense of understanding what constraints on what theories we have by trying to build them in a double copy consistent framework. I had already mentioned earlier that we can talk about Volkov-Akulov in the context of a multiplet with Dirac-Von-Infeld in terms of a double copy between pions and vectors with SUSY, and already mentioned that you could have supergravity coming from vectors in SUSY, double copied with vectors in SUSY. And that's true. You can calculate the predictions of all multiplicity at tree level in both of these theories in a double copy framework just by looking, doing one calculation in your vector theory and doing some pion calculations, and then with just these building blocks, just combining them in various ways to get Volkov-Akulov and supergravity distinctly. But if I want to be talking about what's going on in the process of inflation as described by these effective multi-factor models, then I need to be talking about a theory that has both Dirac-Von-Infeld, Volkov-Akulov, and supergravity together. And so the question today is, can those theories be constructed in a double copy consistent framework, right? Volkov-Akulov fermions scattering off of gravitons in the supergravity background. When I have that, then I've got the framework for exactly all these models people have written down over the years. Okay. So I have the separate building pieces already, Volkov-Akulov by itself or supergravity by itself. And now I'll be putting them together. Okay.
And question?
Yeah, sure.
What is like the motivation for combining these theories?
Oh, the motivation is supergravity calculations can be challenging, right? Any calculus involving gravity can be challenging. We're trying to get an understanding of how to build the right way to build correlation functions and inflationary backgrounds, right? Which is something that is relevant as we get sharper and sharper observations of large-scale structure, allowing us to probe deeper into what happened before the freeze-out. We need handle on making predictions in this quantum evolution of space and time and matter. And right now that's tricky, right? And so what we want is a framework that lets us do that. And so the models that I'm talking about, these alpha attractor models, live in this class of Volkov-Akulov coupled to supergravity. And so we're going to see if we can calculate predictions in those theories from this double copy framework. Is that?
Yeah. That's,
yeah.
Yeah.
Good. And so yeah, and I know I'm talking to an especially data-driven group of physicists, and I'm glad to do so. I will say that the sharpest connection of a lot of the methods that have been talked about to data are going to be applied to effective field theory of large scale structure, which is a classical effective field theory, but which require all the same sort of tools of cut construction and integration that you're building. And the more people we're speaking to, the less we have to reinvent the same wheel, right? So I think that there's a lot of value for the gravitational wave community to be speaking to the type of cosmologists, especially if you're in effective field theory of inflation. But I think the cosmological bootstrap also will have a perspective that you guys find valuable. All right, so yeah, we're clear with the challenges. The question is, can I have a theory that's pions with vectors, with pions and gluons, that's color dual, that I can double copy with vector and SUSY? And if I can build out I can build out the class of field theories that admit these alpha tracker models. All right. I should mention that this talk will largely be at tree level. I don't know if I can get rid of this. That's a little better. All right, so this talk will largely be at tree level, but it's going to be borrowing insight and approaches from loop level. And so I'm going to be, the way we're approaching this is largely the way we approach our multi-loop calculations. And we'll see that this allows us a sort of bootstrap in theory space, the same way that we sort of bootstrap to higher loop calculations. Part of this will involve refining a language around double copy with a verb that even those of you who are familiar with double copy construction might not be so familiar with if you haven't been paying attention to some of what's been going on with effective field theory constructions in the past couple of years, and that's this algebraic composition. So the idea is that one of the things we struggle with when we're trying to calculate, especially at higher loops, in a way that's compatible with color kinematics, is finding representation of the integrand that satisfies the algebraic relations. And this involves because it involves functional relations. This often involves ansatz, and these ansatz can get large, and at some point they saturate what we can achieve. And one of the surprises that we've discovered over the past few years, going in an orthogonal direction, which is trying to look at higher derivative operators, which could naively also be approached via ansatz, ever increasing ansatz, is that we can compose color dual representations together to find new color dual representations. And this lets us build and classify effective field theory operators with, again, a very small set of building blocks. And the idea is what the higher derivative operators do for a living, as far as amplitudes are concerned, is they sprinkle around more momentum upstairs. That's all they do, right? They just D's in the action turning into momentum in the field theory. And it turns out that besides being able to arrive at sort of a small set of solutions that satisfy the algebraic relations that allow theories to play with double copy, we can combine these solutions together to build more solutions. And this I mean, I maybe it's already obvious, so I'm belaboring a point. But if I've got stuff that's linear in momentum in the numerator, and I'm composing with other stuff that's linear momentum in the numerator, at the end of the day, I build something quadratic and momentum in the numerator, right? So I can build a ladder that lets me climb up in higher derivative operators, right? And the solutions aren't always necessarily unique, so you end up being able to span, right? So this add operator isn't necessarily, just building one; it's building many. At which point, with again a very small number of building blocks, you end up spanning all sorts of predictions. And in fact, this does allow us to recover opening closed superstring predictions at tree level as field theory double copies from just a small number of scalar permutation invariants, adjoint numerators in covariantized free scalars, so simple scalars, and pions, and single trace color weights, which is spectacular. So anyway, good. And I just want to emphasize that the distinction between composition and double copy. Composition lets us get new things we can use in double copy, whereas double copy gives us full predictions. And just as an example, the sort of Lagrangian pions I was talking about, you can get as a composition between the kinematic weights of covariantized free scalars. And I'll talk, yeah. So this lets us build building blocks out of building blocks, and the reason we're excited about the potential for this at loop level is hopefully obvious. It starts taking away the need for jumping up and down incredibly large.
So you're saying the composition doesn't impose additional constraints on the numerator?
Well, so there are different types of compositions, right? So of course, I mean, something that you wouldn't even necessarily, it wouldn't even be bothered, it wouldn't even be worth talking about, except it's an example in a class of broader things, is it's trivial to get permutation invariants out of things that satisfy adjoint type relations, same relations as FA pieces, right? So that's one example of a composition. But another example of composition is I can take things that satisfy adjoint types in Jacobi, compose them together and get something else that satisfies Jacobi.
Oh, so you still impose some.
Yeah, that's right. And the thing is, the algebras admitted are intimately related to the topology of graphs. So as you get to higher multiplicity, you have far richer types of algebras that you can start playing with and going between them and adjoint and from adjoint. And it's interesting how small the small number of these that show up in the UV completions we know about, like string theory. That string theory only really seems to care about adjoint type constructions and permutation invariants, which is given the incredible freedom to build gauge invariant things out of algebras at higher multiplicity may be a little surprising, but there's a consistency there that well, we can talk about that. Yeah. All right, good. So since I think I'm a half an hour in and I've barely begun speaking about anything, and there's a lot to talk about. I want to give the summary now, so you can know where I'm going, and so that we can focus on the important steps that get there as we go. Okay, and so the summary is that we can construct predictions and theories. We can find color dual theories of gluons with pions towards alpha tractor models of inflation. And there are two solutions. One engages the trace F3 operator, which is the simplest higher derivative operator you'd ever write down for an action, right? It's trace, F cubed. But one of the things that happens when you engage trace F cubed, as we discovered, is that color kinematics and consistency of factorization forces a tower of effective field theory all the way to the UV, which has interesting properties that I'll talk about, or we can relax exchange symmetry between pions. in a sense, introducing novel flavors to the planets. I'll point out that this engaging of a tower of effective field theories to the ultraviolet has non-trivial consequences for the color dual fate of half-max supergravity, which is the first supergravity that people have ever found ultraviolet divergences at the multi-loop level. It was found to diverge at 4 loops, possibly surprising. I think a lot of people were expecting to diverge at 3 loops, but it's safe at 3 loops. It diverges at 4 loops, and the reason it diverges at 4 loops seems to have a lot to do with an anomaly that shows up in this half-maximal supergravity theory. For the first time, as you're going down from maximal supersymmetry, it only shows up at half-maximal supersymmetry, and there's a color dual understanding of this in terms of half-maximal supergravity being the first time where you're taking a double copy between a supersymmetric theory and a non-supersymmetric theory with a supergravity. And just the same way that there is a surprise for you if you're used to MHV at tree level for QCD, for Yang-Mills, and all of a sudden you go to 1 loop, all of a sudden I've got all plus amplitudes, right? It's exactly that propagating through to half-maximal supergravity that ends up being these anomalous amplitudes. And so how do you eat up all plus, if you want? Well, one way to eat it up is to start engaging with the trace set cubed operator. But if you're going to do it in a consistent way, then the fact that there's a UV completion waiting for you in terms of either twisted heterotic or heterotic strings is something you might want to keep an eye on. Anyway, so let me talk for a second about how we calculated loops. This is going to contain echoes of what we heard about from Fernando last week, which is we're not calculating with Feynman diagrams. They're unwieldy off-shell, and there's a factorial number of them. Of course, we can't get rid of that, but we are graph organized, and that's because unitarity methods allow for very efficient verification of our calculations. And when you've got an efficient way of verifying something is true, then you've got a natural way of constructing it. And that's what cut construction methods do, whether you're approaching them numerically or jumping up and down with analytic expressions. And when one of the reasons why we really do like these local representations is we've got some handle on how to integrate them. So, all right. So what do I mean by graph organized? I assume this is familiar. Even for the people who are calculating classical gravity with these sort of perturbative graph organized methods, at the end of the day, you want some mapping from a labeled topology to propagator weights and numerator weights, and maybe the only thing that's a little different if you're not used to calculating in non-abelian gauge series is you also have non-trivial color weights you have to track when you're calculating in QCD or supersymmetric gauge theories, and the color weights you get for free just dress the vertices with the generators relevant to the particles interacting. And that's straightforward. And the propagator weights are also you get for free for massless particles. So the momentum squared running through it, and if you've got some mass and you just got a little mass slowing you down on the propagators. The thing that's special and distinct between theories, really distinct between theories, are the kinematic weights, and this is what we're constraining with unitarity methods. This is what we're constructing with unitarity methods, are the theory-specific numerator weights associated with topologies that specifically tell you what theory you're talking about. And these weights are constrained by a number of properties. I think one of the most important is they're constrained by the symmetries of the topology, specifically automorphism symmetry. So if I have a dressing that maps the graph to the right to some kinematic function of those labels A through E and maybe associated polarizations or whatever, certainly for E, then how should I dress this labeled graph right here? And it turns out, of course, there are multiple ways of addressing it, having to do with the automorphisms of the graph to the right. Should I call A K1 or should I call A K4? Right? Yeah, people are familiar with these types of games. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? No, everybody sees how there are two ways of labeling the graph on the left via some mapping of the graph on the right, which one I choose to call A and which one I choose to call B, K1 or K4, right? Right. Maybe you remember from your quantum field theory class symmetry factors and how frustrating they are. Yeah. So the point is that if we want the full power of unitarity behind verifying and constructing, the kinematic waves we generate shouldn't care about which path we've chosen as a label. There's no physical information. Right? It's just a choice, right? And so there's a symmetry these things have to respect. And that's constraining. If you were to throw an ansatz, the most general ansatz in the world at what the mapping should be, you're constrained by having automorphisms. And so here's a recipe for calculation. You give an ansatz to topologies, you fix on the symmetries and cuts. And as I mentioned before, there's a factorial number of topologies. And so something like this could be exhausting. You can approach it in all sorts of efficient ways. Your ansatz could be that nothing is contributing when I do the maximal cuts, and so I see the minimum amount of topology can contribute, that relaxed cut conditions, and generalized and generalized intellect. Left out all my cuts, and so that's a lot of delightful small calculations conspiring to build your large loop level calculation. But as we heard from Fernando, there's gravity is worse to play with in that type of construction because you have to go to higher and higher orders in mass dimension because gravity is derivatively coupled worse than gauge theory is. And this is where the duality between color and kinematics can help for both gauge theories and gravity theories. The first place to see where it helps is to just look at the color weights. And here I've just written down adjoint type color weights, since this is dressing every vertex with structure constant FABCs. And there are relationships between color weights of graphs. The color weight of the guy on the left is equal to the color weight, or the sum of the color weights of the two guys on the right. And you'll notice that that the same topology is appearing in both places. So if I know the color weight for this type of topology, then I get the color weight for that type of topology for free, right? That's the difference between two different labels of my half tennis court graph. And so you can demand that this holds for your kinematic weights as well as an additional constraint. And this is what people mean when they say the duality between color and kinematics. A lot of the times they're talking about adjoint, which I've drawn here today, but you can generalize this to other types of algebras and other types of representations. And when you do this, there's combined with automorphism symmetry, there's a drastic reduction in the number of things you have to compute explicitly. In fact, all of the 3 loops at 4 n equals 4 Supergang Mills, you can encode in terms of one topology, just stressing this half tennis court, and then algebraic relations propagated to all the topologies, and then you get the associated gravity amplitude by replacing the color factors with another copy of the kinematic factors. One topology for all of 4 loops work once, and so on and so forth. So there is a drastic reduction in complexity, and this makes it much easier to calculate in your gauge theories. you can set something like this up. And you can always set something like this up on the cuts. And the challenge is figuring out how to set things like this off shelf. And I'm happy to talk more about that stuff offline. As I pointed out, there are feedback constraints. And so these Jacobi relations are functional at loop level. Okay, so high derivative operators, as I mentioned before, sprinkling derivatives in your action is sprinkling derivatives in your amplitude. The game is to figure out all this. So from an effective field theory perspective, I'm building out an effective field theory. I write down all the operators consistent with the symmetries in my theory, right? I don't get to derive the Wilson coefficients of those operators from within my effective field theory. I learn it by either matching to the UV theory, if I know it, or by matching to data, right? Okay, so the game is to write down all the operators that are consistent by symmetries. Well, I've got to figure out how to do that at the level of the action. Or from our perspective, it's all the ways of sprinkling momentum in our amplitudes at some order of mass dimension without messing up any of the symmetries for the theory we want to be talking about. And it turns out that that our symmetries, especially when you start including color kinematics, can be incredibly constraining. For example, pions are completely specified by mass dimension factorization and duality between color kinematics. That's all you need to do to reconstruct all tree level amplitudes for pions. Similarly to the gluons, if I know color kinematics and factorization, then I get gauge invariance for free. Okay.
This is for the lowest.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. So this is right. Just for leading order for pions, but to all multiplicity, right? Okay. So how are we gonna try to build our, so what's our, remember our game is to try to get these alpha attractor model theories in place, and we need is some color dual version of pions plus Yang-Mills that we can double copy with Yang-Mills to get gravity coupled to Vogel's fermions to these nilpotent superfields. Now, the reason is that we know the Yang-Mills. We know the Yang-Mills is color dual by itself. We know the pions is color dual by itself, but there's no guarantee that when we place them together, we're going to get stuff that admits a color dual representation at all, right? And this is an occasion where it wouldn't be much of a talk if there wasn't some challenge involved. So it'll turn out that just squishing these two, just coupling these two theories together, you don't end up with a color dual theory at all. Okay, so I'm just drawing some of the so the familiar interactions for Yang-Mills. Nonlinear sigma model has all even point interactions, right? Again, all related so that they satisfy the duality between flavor and kinematics. And so how are we going to couple them together? Well, you can promote your derivatives to covariance derivatives. So you just set up normal coupling between your glue and your pions. And it doesn't escape me that this is the type of thing that almost nobody wants in general, right? The whole point of pions is you've integrated out your glue. So writing down the theory of gluons double to pions is a little strange, right? But it's okay. I mean, people played with gauge nonlinear sigma models before. Okay, and so you can ask, is the result color dual? So I promoted my, I've made my derivative, I've covariantized my pions, and I'll point out that this first line of sort of interactions where I've just got two pions and then a bunch of glue. It's just the same as a covariantized free scalar. Right? The first occasion for something new is when I start to talk about interactions amongst the pions and the glue. So of course, my tree level and my 4-point are going to be color dual as they are. The first occasion for something to be different is 5 points. And so you just calculate it, right? And so write down your Feynman rules, you can calculate however you like. And it's color dual if the ordered amplitudes you write down satisfy the associated field theory relations, but they don't. So if you just the theory I wrote down, just taking taking pions and coupling them blue minimally. The ordered amplitudes you get down from Feynman rules don't satisfy the n-3 factor relations. They satisfy classical, but they don't admit a color dual representation. And so you can ask, is there any theory that factorizes to 4 points appropriately with pions and has a blue that satisfies color kinematics? And this is something you can bootstrap to. You write down an ansatz for the amplitude. You impose the duality of color kinematics. You impose factorization to the amplitudes you want to see at lower multiplicity in terms of your pions and your vector. You impose gauge invariance. And it turns out there's no problem. You absolutely find a color dual amplitude, and so then you question what theory generates this, right? And in terms of the color dual amplitude, you have basically the same thing we got down from our covariantized pion Feynman rules as that first guy, plus some additional channels, right? And so you just zoom in on those additional channels to see what's in there, and what you find is that what you need to add to the regional action aerodynamics of various pions is you need to add in a trace F cubed, right? That's what's sitting there. If I add in a trace F cubed, I just jot down the Feynman rules, color dual Feynmans. Any questions so far? Pardon me?
You seem to have 6 points.
Oh, did it? Where's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Yeah, I think that's yeah. Let me get rid of this guy. Is that better? Yeah, good. Thank you. That's a problem with me drawing the graphs as opposed to having mathematically draw my graphs. But yeah, thanks for catching. But you guys understand like what happened. We threw an Hans optic on something that was color dual, and then we just probed to see what types of matter content we needed to include in order to get this model to be color dual. Yeah. And it turns out we need a trace F cubed operator.
So does it mean that if you just consider pure Japanese plus one is normal, there's no way you can find the dual representation?
Yeah, it means that 5 points. If you just write it down, just go. We can do it together for in like 10 minutes after. But just covariantize your pions. Write down the Feynman rules. They're very simple Feynman rules. Write down 5 points, and you'll find that the amplitudes don't satisfy n-3 factorial relations. So you can't come up with numerators for those 5-point amplitudes to satisfy Jacobian antisymmetry. So it doesn't have a role in double copy construction as written. Okay. So and that's the whole point, is we wanted to come up with these alpha tracker models of inflation. So we want to be, otherwise, sure, we can write down the theory, but we can't use it for double copy construction. Right? So in order to make it usable, it's demanding this trace F cubed. Okay. Good, so I'm going to continue, yeah. All right, and F cubed is interesting. It's first and only higher derivative correction T angles at 3 points. It's non-vanishing. And it allows factorizable helicity states in Yang mills, at least at tree level, like all plus or all plus and 1 minus, right? And it's related to counter terms for anomaly, as I mentioned before, for half maximal supergravity. So this is an interesting operator to be demanded by something that's allowing gluons and Yang mills to interact in a color dual way. And so I'm just going to briefly talk about the sort of color dual fate of half maximal supergravity. I mentioned it diverges in 4 dimensions of 4 loops, seems tied to the anomalous behavior at 1 loop, and this counter term is related to trace F. The counter term required to eat up this anomalous behavior is related to the double copy between trace F cubed and n equals 4 super Yang mills. This counter term does resolve the 1 loop anomalous behavior, and we know it doesn't mess up the UV behavior of 1 and 2 loops. Sort of a series of of papers involving one author that's in this room, but we don't know, because the calculation hasn't been done yet. We don't know if it actually resolves a for loop UV behavior, right? And so that awaits calculation. We don't know if this counter term involving the double copy of trace F cubed, whether eating up the anomaly of one loop resolves the UV behavior of for loops. That definitely awaits calculation. Just to give you you know what, I'm going to kind of blast through this. I told you how this sort of anomaly behaves. It really comes from the fact that we're double copying with pure Yang-Mills that allows different states at loop level than does the tree level. Because tree level pure Yang-Mills is secretly symmetric. Okay. So you have every right to ask, if I want to be talking about a double copy consistent half maximal supergravity with no anomalies, can I get there by just talking about Yang-Mills with alpha prime times trace F cubed? I need to eat up the dimensional difference between trace F cubed and trace F squared. Is this theory of double copy consistent? I use a color dual factorizing for all multiplicity at tree level. And at 3 points, absolutely, of course it is. And at 4 points, it's single insertion. It is, I just have one insertion in my trace F cubed, but a double insertion, it's not. I need to add another counter term, another operator to my theory. I need a trace F4 in order to make the 4-point amplitude with 2 insertions of my trace F cubed consistent. And so you can ask, can this theory be double copy consistent with a finite number of counter terms? And apparently not. Apparently the interplay between requiring color kinematics and consistent factorization forces a tower all the way to the UV. And basically it's because you're always sewing together at 3 points things with different mass dimensions. And so if I find that I need, we don't have a stick, right? Maybe it's this. Can you guys see this? Is this visible? Barely, right? So, so it turns out this guy requires a trace F4, right? Now, because I have a trace F cubed in my theory, that means I need to consider 5 points at the order alpha prime cubed. But this guy, in order to be color dual, on factorization requires the presence of this operator. And there's just a tower all the way up to the UV. And it's forced on us.
So is that the low energy string theory?
That's a great question. It turns out it does resum. So what would this guy resums? Well, so let me skip the discussion of how you show this. But yeah, so what it does is it resums to a theory called df squared plus Yang-Mills. And when you double copy it as per a supergravity, so what's the consequence for our n equals 4 supergravity is this tower of operators resummed to df squared plus Yang-Mills, double copied with Yang-Mills gives you a Weil-Einstein supergravity theory called the twisted heterotic string. So it's a truncated mode. So it doesn't have all the modes of the heterotic string, but it has one massive mode. But there's freedom in permutation invariance to actually complete it to the full heterotic string. Yeah, and so I should say more about df squared. It's a fascinating theory. It's what lets you build conformal supergravity theories out of double copy, but I'm running out of time. So let me just point out that that this same structure because we've included trace F cubed in our color dual theory of pions with Yang-Mills persists for our entire spectrum, whether it's all 4 vectors or 2 vectors and two pions or 4 pions. We have this tower all the way to the UV. What's this theory? So Yang-Mills plus F cubed resums of DF squared plus Yang-Mills plus pions resums to DF squared plus Yang-Mills plus higher derivative fractions that are consistent dimensional reduction of this DF squared plus Yang-Mills theory. I think one of the interesting things about this is it modifies the soft pion behavior. So what this means is that at 6 points, because we now have these extra states running around, that even at lambda squared, so normal pions, you have what you're used to from pions, nonlinear sigma model, but then you've got contributions with factorization channels, and these factorization channels definitely play with the soft behavior. And so you have every right to wonder if you get to call these guys pions. Sure, it has the 4 pion amplitude, but if you have modified IR behavior, if you mess with the Adler zero, do you really get to call these guys pions? And when you take the double copy with fermions in your Yang-Mills theory, do you really get a bulk of a color fermion? The double copy IR behavior is also modified. So does nilpotence survive? Right, the whole point of this was to build a theory that lets us, construct these alpha model attractors of inflation that requires nilpotent superfields. And so if I've modified my IR behavior in the theory, do I still get and so this is absolutely an open question. And if not, we can be pessimistic, maybe it doesn't. We played with something fairly fundamental. So are we lost? Is the phenomenology of alpha attractor models unreachable from a double copy analysis? And to answer that, in the last 2 minutes of my talk, I just want to revisit our original analysis. What assumption can we relax? But I mean, we seem to bootstrap fairly generally, right? And remember, we started out with covariant pions. We just calculate with the 5-point amplitude, and we see that the n-3 factorial relations, the PCJ relations are violated in this theory. It turns out what we're assuming here is that these 3 amplitudes have the same functional form, right? With different relabels. And there's a flavorful solution. What if there are 2 flavors of pions such that this ordered amplitude has a different functional form than this ordered amplitude? Can we find a consistent field theory where the color dual relations are satisfied? And absolutely. There's a dimensional reduction from Yang-Mills nonlinear sigma model that takes pure glue to 2 flavor of pions. And this is, I recognize there aren't so many amplitudes people in the room, but for the amplitudes people who are in the room, if you're the type of the amplitudes person who has for years been saying, oh yeah, it's trivial to get pion amplitudes, I just play with polarizations of my gluons. That's all that's going on here. Good. And so it turns out, there are some, there's some new structure that shows up once you've allowed, these multiple flavors of pions coupled to glue, but this is actually very straightforward. You do have distinct functional forms. Color kinematics is satisfied. There's no tower. There's no trace F cube. No Adler zero modification. No modification of the Volkov-Fukulov behavior. But we did give something up. We gave a exchange symmetry between pairs of pions because they have a structure that's, they've got different flavors. Still, there's tons of color dual freedom to play with the same games as we played with our other theory. Okay, so we get back to the summary slide that presented what may feel to some of you like a million years ago, that we can build color dual pions coupled to Yang mills towards alpha attractor models to let us start exploring, sharply predictions in inflationary theories by playing around with building blocks in just flat space-time gauge theories where we hopefully have everything under control. These two different model, one engages trace up cube, and this forces a tower effective field theory to the UV that ends up closing into a family of theories that include very familiar theories from string theory, or we can have real exchange symmetry between our pions. And this game has non-trivial consequences for the colorful fate of n equals 4 supergravity, sort of in the song. So let me close the slide with next steps. Learning how to do this sort of composition at loop level, we've got some examples at 1 loop and now starting to have examples at 2 loops and 3 loops. We need to nail down a proof. I think it's pretty clear that this trace F cubed plus color kinematics plus consistent factorization closes df squared plus Yang mills, but still it awaits a formal proof. There are fun games to be played with what gauge theories double copies effective field theory of inflation, what gauge theories double copies effective field theory of large scale structure. Writing down first correlation functions in flat space of these theories and then promoting them to de Sitter. And of course, effective this tower explicit loop level calculations in half maximal supergravity to see what the UV behavior actually is. Anyway, so there's tons to do, and I look forward to spending time talking with all of you to talk about how some of these model building games can be hopefully learning from some of the questions you're playing around with very sharp calculations in gravitational physics. Thank you.
Curious.
Sure.
So I browsed very superficially in the definition of participation, but there is something that's struck me. So when you look at inflation, it's a theory basically of spontaneous image breaking of the sitter, and the gravitational multi-gun dynamical. So that's on the double copy, I never see. I mean, instead of double copying gluons, I would rather double copy spontaneously broken gauge symmetries.
Yeah. So, good. So this. Yeah. We should.
But I haven't. I mean,
no. This hasn't come out. This is stuff. This is stuff. In preparation, the square root inflation, the effective field inflation is
okay, but it's not been done yet. No, it's not me missing something.
No.
You are doing.
Yeah. See, next steps.
Okay. Yeah. You are already on it.
Working on.
Okay.
No. So
anticipate.
Oh yeah. So we know. Oh yeah. Good. So there was this nice paper by Xiaoshen and Daniel Green about a year ago that was looking at symmetry properties of amplitudes in effective field theory of inflation. I'd never seen amplitudes in the effective field theory of inflation. It's breaking rents, right? It's breaking rents. And so all of a sudden you've got these energy modes floating around, blah, blah, blah. But it turns out it's really straightforward to calculate. And it's very straightforward to start writing down what scalar gauge theories double copy to generate tree level 3.4, 5.6 point. And that's where we are right now.
That was my naive expectation. I wanted somehow double copy.
Yep, and it makes sense. It makes sense. So you want spontaneous symmetry. You already know that so if you think of the pion as a, spontaneous secret gluon that Wilson was left over, the double copy of pions with pions gives you a special Galilean. That's not effective filter inflation, right? It's the wrong mass dimension. It's not what we're playing with. But it turns out that you get very close to the root of inflation by just taking the double copy of pions with the type of covariantized scalar you get from dimensionally reducing things. And yeah, and I can say more about that when I'm not.
Yeah, maybe. Well, one whole week.
Yeah.
Is there any other example in which so you combine here maybe and similarly they have their double copies. I mean, it's part of another file. So is there another example in which I know in theories which have the double copies in this shape, in which this the double copy is then combined into
Good. So just within the past year, I think we've seen two examples. Well, it depends on what you mean by other data. By taking matter that's, I can't, I mean, the first case of, can you find a color tool representation of anything, maybe a color tool representation, right? So just the very early days, you realize that, that Yang mills with too many adjoint fermions can't be color dual. And it's intimately tied up with what type of supersymmetry you can have in any particular dimension. That's, I think more recently in the spirit of forcing like a tower of higher derivative operators, Yara and Henriette have both looked at scalar sectors and looked at the consequence of taking a perfectly happy color dual scalar theory, adding a higher derivative operator to just the scalar theory, and then seeing an interplay between 4 points and 6 points, forcing a tower of corrections. So that if you just added a higher derivative operator that by itself would be color dual, you would end up with non-color dual higher point amplitudes. Does that answer your question?
What's the waste of causality? Why should it be related?
Why should it be related? So good. So what happens when you impose color kinematics on amplitudes involving adjoint fermions is you get relations between the spinors, and these relations between spinners can only be satisfied in certain dimensions, and if the spinners have certain properties, and it turns out these are exactly the constraints of supersymmetry. And so I'm happy to take you through like just a 4-point example. I think I could also point you to papers. I think the first paper this was written about, Radu wrote about this maybe 7 years ago. And pardon me? Well, so you'll see that you can only satisfy color kinematics if spinners are related to each other in a way that, for example, they have to be Majorana, or they have to be, Majorana, and it can only be satisfied in certain dimensions. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think that's a very satisfactory answer for
Just experimenting.
Ooh.
Just like you mentioned, work out.
No, I'm saying, no, it forces you, it forces you to have the relationship between fermions that you require for supersymmetry, if you make them adjoint. There are no constraints for fundamental fermions, no constraints.
Supersymmetry relates to fermions and bosons.
Yeah. Right,
Right.
oh, good, so let's, I mean, let's, if you don't mind, yeah, let's take it offline and I can, yeah.
Okay. So we thank JJ again. So for those who arrived late, you want to give your 30-second introduction